Hi, I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and you're watching PBS Books. Thank you for joining us today. Happy Poetry Month! PBS Books, in collaboration with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, is pleased to host a program with New York Times best-selling writer Clint Smith, who just released Above Ground. Clint Smith's vibrant and compelling new collection of 70 poems traverses the vast emotional terrain of fatherhood and explores how becoming a parent has recalibrated his sense of the world. There are poems that interrogate the ways our lives are shaped, both by personal lineages and historical institutions. Smith's lyrical narrative poems bring the reader on a journey through the changing world we are all a part of. Let's meet the author. Clint Smith is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He is the author of the narrative nonfiction book, How the Word is Passed, a reckoning with the history of slavery across America, which was a #1 New York Times bestseller, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction, the Hillman Prize for Book Journalism, and selected by the New York Times as one of the best books of 2021. He is also the author of the poetry collection Counting Descent, which won the 2017 Literary Award for Best Poetry Book from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and was a finalist for an NAACP Image Award. His writings have been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Poetry Magazine, the Paris Review, and more. Clint received a BA in English from Davidson College and a PhD in education from Harvard University. It is my pleasure to welcome Clint.
It's so good to be here with you.
It is so great to have you back on the show. And in case the audience did not already know, it's pretty clear from your bio, you are a big deal. And so we are so thrilled to be able to have you come with your newly released book, Above Ground, and as we celebrate Poetry Month. So, okay, counting on Descent, thinking about that was more a coming of age story in a lot of ways. It won critical acclaim, and now you're sharing a new book with us, Above Ground. Can you discuss why poetry as an art form is important to you, and why poetry is important to you? Just poetry, why?
Yeah, no, it's. I thank you for asking that question. For me, poetry is both the creation of art, but it is also the mechanism through which I do my best thinking. It is a way for me to pay attention to the world. It's almost as if you are walking by a tree in front of your house every day, and you walk by that tree, you see that tree. If someone asked you to describe that tree, you would be able to give a sort of general outline of what that tree is, what it looks like. But it's different when you stop and you look at that tree, like really look at it for the first time, and you zoom in on one leaf. Maybe you have a camera, and you zoom in on one leaf, and you can see this actually several different shades of green. You can see the way that it's turning yellow at the tips because the seasons are changing. You can see the way that near the stem it has a hole in it where a caterpillar took a bite, right? So it's not that you're seeing it for the first time, but you're seeing with a different level of granularity and specificity. And I think for me, that's what poetry is. It allows me to pay attention to the world in a different sort of way. It allows me to excavate the things that I might otherwise overlook. And so for me, it is just a way of moving through the world. It's a way of seeing the world, regardless of whether I'm writing poems or not. It is the sort of North Star. It's my orientation to try to make sense of the world in front of me.
Well, in a lot of ways, this book helps us to see you and how you are seeing the world. And I'm hoping you can share a little bit about your latest book and the premise of it.
Yeah, so Above Ground is a collection of poems largely centered on fatherhood. And part of what I'm thinking about is the duality and the complexity of parenthood, thinking about how it is the most joyous, remarkable, wondrous, awe-inspiring experience in so many ways, and also the most exhausting and the most difficult and the most humbling, and something that shows you parts of yourself that you love and parts of yourself that you don't love. But even more broadly than that, part of what I'm fatherhood is the prism through which I'm thinking about that duality, but I'm really thinking about the sort of human experience and how so much of um, and the simultaneity of our emotional experience, that you can be at the park pushing your kid in a swing and then get a phone call telling you about the diagnosis of a loved one, that you can be having dinner with your family while the sort of larger climate catastrophe is happening all around you. And so I'm interested in how we hold all of these different things together.
Why did you choose this title? Where did it come from?
Yeah, my wife actually helped select it. I think I was wrestling with what the sort of central conceit of the project was, and obviously was thinking a lot about parenthood, thinking a lot about fatherhood, but it was really also thinking about what it meant to be alive, and what it means to be alive, and to be above ground for this brief amount of time that we all have the opportunity to, and I think to consider what it means to fully appreciate all that is in front of you, while also taking seriously the things that make our lives difficult. Again, coming back to the simultaneity of the human experience. And so above ground is this sort of reference and allusion to, my children sort of making their way into the world, but also a sort of allusion to the idea that our lives above ground are filled with so much complexity, are filled with so much joy and wonder, and also fear and despair. And we don't have to run from either one of those, or we can sit with them and recognize that holding all of that together is just a reflection of what it means to be above ground, to be alive.
Well, and this book, it is very personal, and it is a human experience overall, but it's your human experience. And in many ways, it seemed some aspects like a diary.
Mm.
It explores, as you said, the joys and challenges of fatherhood. There were two quotes a few pages apart. One said, the joy is being a father to a mystery. And then a few pages later, it says, welcoming you, as in the child, into the flames. And I thought that juxtaposition was so interesting. And I felt throughout you had like this joy and then this concern. And as a parent, one knows that how that feels. When did you start writing these poems? Where did you write these poems? And when did you know it was going to be a book?
So I started writing these poems around the same time that my wife got pregnant for the first time. So this would have been September of 2016. And, it was, as I write about in the book, we had some fertility issues. It was very uncertain. It felt very precarious. And even when we did get pregnant, the whole thing felt so fragile throughout the process. And, I know so many parents know that feeling of waking up each day and just hoping that everything is okay, hoping you'll still hear the heartbeat, hoping you'll still feel those feet sort of pushing against the inside of the mother's skin. And so, it is this thing that both feels so remarkable, and it's a small miracle, right, to bring a life into the world. And it also feels so fragile, right? And it feels so uncertain, both uncertain in terms of it coming to fruition, and uncertain because, especially when you're becoming a parent for the first time, you really have no idea what you're getting into. As so many of us know, you realize that so much of parenting is kind of figuring it out as you go. So this book began 6 years ago. Where did I write this book? Everywhere. I write in my phone. I write in a notebook. I write on my computer. I write during nap time. I write during episodes of Peppa Pig and Daniel Tiger. I write like whenever I have a friend and mentor, Imani Perry, an incredible writer and professor at Princeton. When I first had my son, she has two kids of her own. I remember we had lunch once, and she was telling me, "You got to let go of this idea that you're going to have like long, luxurious periods of time to write. That's gone. You got to write, like, even if it's just 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes to sit down and write something. You got to take advantage of that time." And so I really took that to heart, and I write everywhere. I have like my own hashtag that I put on Instagram sometimes, my stories, where I'm saying the office is everywhere. I'll be writing in the barbershop, at the mechanic, at the in the line waiting to pick my kids up from school. I really believe that you have to be proactive in creating that space, especially after you become a parent, because otherwise it's not going to just come to you in that way. You have to be direct in creating that space for you.
For sure. I mean, I think anyone who's passionate and has kids has to fit it in, especially in the early years, right? So trying to figure out how to fit in that creative craft is sometimes a challenge, but also a good challenge because it is a passion you're fulfilling. How did your work on the book, How the Word is Passed, influence this book? Were you writing the poems that were included in this book at the same time you were working on your other work? And how did that impact one another?
Yeah, no, that's what's interesting, is that this book, in many ways, was happening alongside How the Word is Passed, but also was an extension of it in its own way. So what I mean is that people who read the book will see that that the poems about parenthood are largely in chronological order, and so it's kind of tracing both from the pregnancy of my son, pregnancy of my daughter, and their lives following. The other part is that when I was working on How the Word is Passed, I began thinking a lot about children, and how the word is passed is about how different historical sites reckon with or fail to reckon with their relationship to the history of slavery. And so I would visit these plantations, I visit these prisons, I visit these places that carry this legacy in their soil, that carry this legacy in their buildings. And I would think about the impact that slavery had on children, in part because when I was growing up, I think when I was taught about the horror of slavery, I was taught about it largely through the lens of the spectacle of physical brutality, and the beatings and the whippings and the lynchings, and certainly that's a huge part of it, a horrific part of it. But I never thought as much about family separation. I never thought as much about the idea of children being separated from their parents. And I remember standing in a cabin at the Whitney Plantation, and I have a poem about this toward the end of the book, where I was in this cabin that enslaved people had once lived in, hundreds of years ago. And you hear the wood moan under your feet as you step inside. You see the light slice in through the cracks above you. And I closed my eyes and I tried to imagine what it would be like if I put my kids to sleep one night and I opened my eyes the next day and my children were gone. And I had no idea where they went. I had no idea who had taken them. I had no idea if I would ever see them again. It's a sort of unfathomable, unimaginable sort of horror and cruelty. And then you have this moment where you realize that, oh, this is the omnipresent threat that millions of enslaved people lived under every single day of their lives, that at any moment you can be taken away from your children, your parents, your husband, your wife, your siblings, your community, the people who love you, for no reason at all. And so I was thinking a lot about that as I was writing How the Word is Passed. And I was thinking about the sort of lineage of Black parenthood and what it means to raise children in a context in which they can be so easily stripped away from you. And then I was thinking about my life now. And I was thinking about how so much of my life now and my children's lives are only possible because of generations of people who fought for a freedom they knew they might never see, but who fought for it anyway because they knew that someday someone would. And I think about how me having a dance party with my kids in the kitchen, or me making French toast with my kids, or me going to my kid's soccer game, or me watching my kid go down the slide at the playground. Those moments are only possible because of these generations of folks who struggled, who fought, and who made freedom possible. And so in that sense, Above Ground is the sort of extension of how the word is passed, because I wanted to explore how that struggle of so many millions of people made possible the texture of my life today, made possible these moments of joy and wonder that I get to experience with my kids, and to reflect the expansiveness of the Black experience, that it is not solely defined by violence and oppression and a horrific history, although it is important to recognize that. It is also defined by so much more than that. It's far more expansive than that, far more robust than that. And I wanted to write into that space.
Well, we are glad that you did, and that you've shared your amazing words with us on these pages. Would it be possible for you to read Dance Party for us? That is a poem that was almost pure joy, I feel like, as a mother, because I too, I could see the whole thing happening in my house.
Yeah.
And it would be great to hear you read it.
Absolutely. Dance Party. Sometimes in the evenings after dinner, after the spaghetti has been slurped and I have bribed the broccoli into their bellies, I give both of my children the look. When my eyes meet theirs, they know what time it is. They push in their chairs, they stretch their legs, and we move the table to the far end of the dining room to clear space for what we all know is coming. Alexa, play the post-dinner Dance Party playlist. And within seconds, Martha Wash's booming voice rolls like thunder over our bodies. Everybody dance now. The electronic keyboard and the drums meet in the middle of the room like two dinosaurs ready to claim this kitchen as their own. Immediately, the jumping begins, and my daughter is flinging her limbs like an offbeat octopus, hands slapping the air behind her as if she is trying to smack anyone who enters her sacred space. I turn around, and my son is doing the robot, or is being eaten by a robot, or is trapped in a universe where robots take over the bodies of little boys in peanut butter pajamas. Nonetheless, there was a robot somewhere, and my children, bless them, have not yet taught to clap on the 2 and 4, so I laugh, also cringe, as their small hands make a mockery of the melody around them. Now, halfway through the song, everyone is jumping, and I, caught up in the ecstasy of this moment, fall to the ground and convince this no longer young body that it is a good idea to start doing the worm. And when my children see me, their eyes become pools of possibility, and it is clear that they see this as a clarion call to climb onto my back. And now, here we are, this strange trifecta, this unlikely trio, a robot and an octopus riding the back of a worm who will certainly need some Tylenol before bed. And it is in this moment that their mother comes home. And when she opens the door, everyone is screaming, the speakers are blasting, and the percussion is shaking every wall around us. We look up at her, and she looks down at us, and we have no explanation for this strange scene, only an invitation for her to join.
I love that poem. Many of your poems made me laugh. Ode to an Electric Baby Swing, Ode to an Infant Hiccup, even parts of the poem where you are dancing in the middle of a grocery store. Do you laugh at your own poems?
Yes, those poems like that are a real delight to write. And you know, part of why I wanted to write this book, and part of why I write poems about fatherhood, even beyond the context of putting a book together, because you know there are dozens, probably hundreds of poems that I've written over the past several years about being a parent that aren't in this book, right? Mm-hmm. And they're just for me. They're just in my computer. They're on my notepad. They're in my phone. But what they are these sort of time capsules. They're these archives of moments that I want to hold on to in the same way that, you know, and so many of us now, especially in this technological moment, know, like, you take a picture, make a video of your kid, and then like, and you know, sometimes you'll get in the habit of scrolling back a few years ago, and you're like, I can't believe this is the same kid. Like, I can't believe this. And you know, it's the video of the dance party, or it's the video of them walking for the first time. And it just brings you so much joy. This is almost the sort of poetic manifestation of that, right? This desire for me to see a moment in its fullness, to hold it, to sit alongside it. And again, what the poem does is allows me to like excavate it, to dig into it, to see it in its most granular minutia. And to appreciate it. Because what we know about parenthood is that, what's the old cliche? The days are long, but the years are fast. It's, I can't believe I have a kindergartner. I see him kind of like bop into school with his big old backpack and with a bunch of fifth graders around. And I'm like, I can't believe this is the same kid who who just the other day I was like, I can't imagine when you can talk. Right. Like, and now and I can imagine it only keeps happening. They become 10, they become 15, and you're like, I can't believe we're here already.
Well, and you blink and they're in high school and they're driving. And people told me that when he was going to, when my oldest was going to kindergarten, oh, you'll blink. And I was like, yeah, right. But it's really true. Okay, so you said a cliche or an old adage, and I have one for you. So they always say laughter is the best medicine. So obviously you have some very serious, we're going to do a quick reset in a moment and talk about those poems, but do you have a poem that you would prescribe?
Oh, one of my poems.
Yes, for laughter.
Oh, interesting. I think that probably Ode to the Electric Baby Swing. Just because the like sleep deprivation of being a parent is so absurd, and it just makes you so delirious. Like, I never understood sleep deprivation as a torture tactic until I had children. It was like, oh, I actually am like, I can't think straight. And it's so like, it was such a hard time. My daughter especially, like, we had a really hard time with her sleeping, and the electric baby swing, I joke about it in the thing, but like, it was our salvation. It's one of those things where you're so desperate, you're looking around, please let something put this child to sleep. And I remember when we first put my son in the electric baby swing, and it was swinging back and forth, and with the metronomic back and forth, and the little planets were spinning overhead, and the cheesy music was playing. But it worked, and I was just so. I don't know that I've ever experienced a sense of relief like I did in that first moment. And so it's one of those moments where you like laugh to stop from crying. And so I was just like, I was so delirious and so desperate, and the swing worked. And I was just, it's kind of like you take some of the hardest parts of parenting and you try to not reimagine it, but sort of recalibrate to the absurdity of it. And obviously you can look back on it with a lot more levity and humor than when you're living in the midst of it.
Oh, for sure.
I think maybe I would prescribe that one as a way to tell people that you'll sleep again one day.
Well, I want to remind the audience, especially people who just joined us, I'm Heather Marie Montilla. You are watching PBS Books, and it is my honor today to be here with Clint Smith, award-winning author, writer, poet. He just came out with a new book, Above Ground, and we are celebrating Poetry Month, and it is a book of about 70 amazing poems. Some will make you laugh, some will really make you think and challenge you, and some might make you cry. So we've been talking about a lot of the laughter and some hard stuff too. And now we want to talk a little bit more about how Above Ground really, it wrestles with wonder and despair in this tumultuous society of political upheaval at times. And your book is dealing with family, relationships, race, ethnicities, traditions, culture, history. And in some ways, you're able to tackle things that some people maybe are uncomfortable with. Why is it? Example, Willie Francis. I didn't know about Willie Francis. And it was a great space for me. I had just been laughing on a different page. And now I learn about this young man, I believe he was 18, who received the electric chair, but was convicted at 16. And can you share a little bit about that poem and your thinking in including it in this collection?
Yeah, I was writing a lot. I have a chapter in How the Word is Passed about Angola prison. And so I was thinking a lot about Louisiana State Penitentiary, this sort of larger system of incarceration in Louisiana. And Willie Francis was a name that I had come across in that research process. He was a young man, he was a boy who was sentenced to death by electric chair. And he was placed in the chair and they turned it on. And it was unsuccessful in taking his life, which meant that he was being electrocuted over and over again, but it didn't kill him. And then he and his lawyer appealed to say that what had happened, he had been tortured and he shouldn't have to experience that again. But then about a year later, he was put back in the electric chair, and this time it was successful in taking his life. And I was thinking about that story and I couldn't shake it because it was such a horrific image to consider. And obviously in the context of this book, I'm thinking about how Willie Francis was somebody's son, you know? And so I'm just thinking, like, what would it mean if my child was sentenced to death by electric chair and I had to watch them be tortured by an electric chair and not die immediately, not die at all, right? Over the course of several minutes, be electrocuted over and over again. It's something that I can't even, without sort of like welling up, bring myself to consider. And yet this is something that happened, right? He was someone's son. And they had to watch that, experience that in a way that feels so horrific. And so, it was, again, because this book is thinking about how parenting is full of like those moments of laughter and levity and joy. And also it creates the emotional stakes of your child suffering because of those moments, right? Because of those moments you share where you're like snuggled up reading a book, because of those moments you share having dance parties, because of those moments you share when your child says, "I love you," just you take all that and then you swing it to the other side and imagine watching that person, small human who you've helped raise, experience suffering. It is so, that is one of the most difficult things about being a parent, is watching our children hurt, emotionally, psychologically, physically. And so I wanted to sort of explore that historical analog in that way also.
Mm-hmm. Can we discuss a little bit the order of the poems? And we discussed this a little bit, right? Some of it is very much in chronological order of your children as they're born in their life, but it's interspersed with the national anthem, your national anthem, or other stories. Were those also chronological? Because for me, in some ways, the poems go from, some are therapeutic to me, and some are declarations, and some are for fun. I mean, did you I think said you wrote hundreds of poems, and these are, were the pick to share with the world. And so could you share a little bit more, I guess, about the process, your creative process or creative selection in the poems you chose to include?
Yeah, I wanted there to be a narrative within the collection. Like I wanted people to feel as if they were on a journey, even if it was through a collection of separate poems alongside me. And the sort of through line of that narrative is becoming a parent and watching at different stages as my kids, make their way into the world and observe the world and become part of the world. I also, was mindful of how, you just mentioned that sometimes you would have a poem that was really light and full of fun, and then you'd flip and there'd be a poem that was thinking about and wrestling with topics that were a lot more, that were a lot heavier. And so I didn't want to do a thing where it was like all the dad poems here, all the poems about my grandparents here, all the poems about geopolitics here, all the poems, because part of the point of the collection is that like our lives are not thematically demarcated in that way, right? Like our lives are not compartmentalized into specific places in which we can experience one set of emotions at one time and then step out of it and experience another set of emotions. What is the case is that our lives are a reflection of the simultaneity of the human experience, right? So when you go from a poem in the book about watching your kid smell a flower at the park, and then the next poem is about a drone attack in the Middle East, it's because, in part, because like that's how I'm experiencing the world. Like that is a reflection of the emotional texture of my personal landscape, right? That you are with your kid at the park while drones are being dropped on other children somewhere else in the world, that you are making dinner for your family while you're, there is a civil war beginning somewhere else, that your child is coming into the world as your parent or your grandparent is on their way out of the world, right? And so I wanted those poems to exist alongside one another because that's how those things exist in the world. And I didn't want to overly thematically compartmentalize different parts of the book because I don't think that that's how our lives look.
No, our lives are not compartmentalized at all. And it makes a lot of sense, but I wanted to ask, so thank you for explaining that. So I always like to ask authors if they have a favorite library and their next upcoming project, if they can discuss it.
My favorite library, there's the contemporary answer and then there's the nostalgic answer. I love the Martin Luther King Library in Washington, D.C. I've had several events there for my own books and done several author talks there. And sometimes I go work there. Sometimes I meet friends there. And they've done like an incredible renovation, beautiful space, just full of big glass. It's a glass building filled with so much natural light and really, really incredible work that they've done there. And then the top floor operates as a museum to so much of the history that's in Washington, D.C. and surrounding areas. And I love that. As a kid, it was the Gentilly Terrace Public Library. And my mom always took us there. And I was very big into the summer reading contest. Like I was like 100% like, I'm going to get that personal pan pizza. I was like, can I get 7 personal pan pizzas? I'll read 7,000 pages if that's what it takes. Like, let's do it. I was so into it. And I loved that. And I loved summers at the library.
So it's the pizza that drove you, not the library. That's what I'm hearing.
What's interesting is that, you don't have time to be my therapist right now, but it's the sort of it is interesting to consider, like, I was a very competitive kid. I played sports my whole life. And so it's interesting to think about how the sort of competition served as an entry point to a love of literature for me. And I think it's interesting because that's also how I entered life as a poet, was through slam poetry, was through a competitive literary ecosystem, which then created its own love of literature. So, it is interesting to think about how there are kids like me who have this competitive instinct, maybe that comes from sports or that comes from elsewhere, and just need that pretense as a way to enter a space that might otherwise have been, we might have been less inclined to.
Okay, so any upcoming projects you can share?
Upcoming projects. I am thinking, I've been thinking a lot about World War II and how we remember World War II and what are the different spaces and places that tell the story about this consequential moment in our history, and what are the stories about World War II that are not often lifted up in our sort of public discourse and public memory around that institution. So all I can say right now is that I'm working on a project that is thinking a lot about what we do remember and what we don't remember of that war, and whose stories are and are not included.
Well, we look forward to getting to speak with you when you come out with that book. This has been an incredible conversation, Clint. We're so appreciative for you sharing your insights, for your work, especially this work of poetry above ground. We also like to thank our libraries, more than 1,800 strong around the country, for joining us, for sharing this important content with all of you and local PBS stations who share the content as well. It is Poetry Month, so we encourage everyone to read a poem or a book of poems. Until next time, I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and happy reading.